All right, I'm just curious. We've been talking about the contracts coming up and Mike Dunleavy Jr. and what he said, on NBC Sports Bay Area. And really, my question is, when we talk about, or not we, but when the NBA world talks about the best coaches, and maybe I'm completely missing the boat on this, Dibs, but when the NBA talks about the best coaches, the number one name you hear is Erik Spoelstra. And whether it's national, whatever the case may be, you definitely hear Erik Spoelstra. And I'm not really sure we all have that uncle, or it's your dad, or whoever that says, well, if I had Kevin Durant and Steph Curry on my team and Klay Thompson, I could have coached and won a championship. And to be honest, is it possible? Maybe. I don't know. I would like to think no, but it's possible. I mean, those are two of the best players of all time.
Sure.
And I don't know, when you talk about, I don't think that Steve Kerr would ever want to go anywhere else. But if he possibly did, what is Steve Kerr's, for lack of a better term, value as a coach? How does the basketball world see Steve Kerr? It's just not very often where I hear talking heads talk about Steve Kerr as a brilliant basketball coach. I don't hear it a lot. I mean, the first championship, they gave credit to the assistant coach that said, hey, you should put Iguodala in the lineup. Then you blow the 3-1 lead, and then you win with Kevin Durant the 2 years, and then KD gets injured and Klay gets injured. And then this next championship, bunch of injuries. Then this next championship, everybody would say this was, a Steph-led situation. So when we watch the local broadcast, Steve Kerr, he draws up the best inbound plays and things like that. But in terms of like top 10 or top 5 basketball coaches, is Steve Kerr seen as a top 5 basketball coach? I don't know. I mean, he's coach of Team USA.
Sure.
So my guess is yes, but I feel like maybe because people are used to Steve Kerr, I personally feel like I don't hear it a lot. But maybe it's just me.
Let's stay in this spot because I like the way you laid that out, because I will draw on my experience as a coach at my own level, and it's a little level. High school sports. I coached high school boys volleyball for 15 or 20 years, and I had tremendous success at Drake High School, which is now called Archie Williams, because turns out Sir Francis Drake himself was a bad guy. So all of the woke parents in Marin felt like the name Drake had to be expunged from the record.
Right.
So my 3 North Coast section titles in many quarters are listed under the title of Archie Williams High School, which I never coached at Archie Williams High School. I knew Archie Williams, Olympian, ran alongside Jesse Owens in 1932 in Berlin, a great man. I knew Archie's son, Carlos Williams, rest in peace. So this is not to disparage Archie Williams, but at my little level, I was given wild credit for the success I had. But when I look at it, I had an unbelievable amount of talent. So I look at those teams that I coached to championships. We were 29-6. We were 32-7 my last year. We were a juggernaut. And I don't win anything if I don't have a super talented roster. However, being able to coach a lot of talent and players who maybe have egos, and when you get into success, it's just a different skill set. So this is a long way of pointing to Steve Kerr and people who say, oh, I could have easily coached that team. You had so much talent. Well, could you have? Because coaching like the Detroit Pistons, Monty Williams got the job to coach Detroit,
right?
And they've got Cade Cunningham and a bunch of other 21-year-olds. They're like an under 22 AAU team that Monty Williams is going to be coaching.
Right.
What he's going to do is markedly different from what Steve Kerr is going to do with a group of 35 and 38 and 39-year-olds. So this is not to say that Steve Kerr is overrated or underrated, but it's to say Steve Kerr's job coaching KD, Steph, Klay, and Draymond, and Iguodala, and David West, and Leandro Barbosa, and Sean Livingston, that skill set is completely different from what another coach has to do in another spot.
Exactly. And the difference is Steve Kerr, he still has Steph, right? You lost KD, but you still have Steph, and you did end up winning one without without KD, right? And I see you, Don Mega, on the YouTube chat coming in spicy hot. Thanks for joining the show. And Don Mega is saying, well, Spo had LeBron, D-Wade, Shaq, all of those guys, but I'm talking about Spo now. They talk about Eric Spoelstra now and what he's done. Getting to the bubble, right, added to his legend. Getting to the bubble championship, and they didn't win, but getting to the finals, added to his legend. And even what he did now, where, what were they, the 7 seed, a play-in team, getting to the finals. So Eric Spoelstra, and again, this goes back to the same conversation we've been having about the Giants, about exceeding expectations being different than meeting them. Eric Spoelstra has been in situations, he hasn't won when he was exceeding expectations, but he has gotten a lot further than people thought. But he's been in situations because he's lost the guys. Steve Kerr never lost the guys. Eric Spoelstra, he won the one with D-Wade and Shaq, and obviously Shaq was on the other end of his career, but he wins that one. Cool. To be completely honest with you, you could make the argument that the Heat underperformed when they had the big three, right? You could make that argument. So he gets those championships with the big three as well. And after that, once he loses all of those stars, he gets Jimmy Butler, who is one of the most confusing stars in the league.
Right.
Now you're in a situation where you can overachieve because your team isn't as good. Steve Kerr has never been in a position where he can overachieve. All he can do is underachieve. The only time he probably could have, to be honest, maybe 2015. A lot of people thought, well, Mark Jackson was just there.
Right.
And then that next year, wow, Steve Kerr's about to have, or does have, the best record in regular season history, and they didn't win the finals. So that was really the only opportunity he had besides maybe 2022, where not a lot of people thought that the Warriors were done. You still had Steph Curry, but that's really the only time. And because you have the greatest shooter of all time, Steve Kerr does not get the same flowers that Eric Spoelstra does.
Right, and I think Spoelstra gets those flowers for a number of different reasons. And you make a good point in terms of what he's done since he had the big three. Well, they've been Eastern Conference finalists, and this year they made it to the NBA Finals with a team that had a bunch of undrafted guys.
Right.
You had Jimmy Butler, and you had Bam Adebayo, and then you had a bunch of undrafted virtual nobodies, Duncan Robinson and Max Strus, and a bunch of other players that nobody ever wanted. So it's easy to look at Spoelstra.
Gabe Vincent.
Right, and Spo is the second longest tenured coach in the association. He's been there since April of 2008. Steve Kerr now third, by the way, on that list. It goes Popovich, Spoelstra, and Steve Kerr. Coach Spo has never won NBA Coach of the Year, which actually makes me respect him even more.
Right.
Because I think the NBA Coach of the Year award is largely a joke in terms of, which coach actually wins it. Steve Kerr won one time NBA Coach of the Year, and it's when they went 73-9. So you go 73-9. 24 of those games were coached by Luke Walton straight out of the chute.
Right.
Steve Kerr was out with the spine injury, yet that's the year where his peers or the experts considered him to have done his best coaching job.
Well, that's a good point, too, because Luke Walton came in, did that, and that added to the uncles and your cousins and your dads. Well, look, Luke Walton came in, they didn't even miss a beat. That's what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? So that adds to it as well. This is from Insider.com. This is from 2022, because I'm just trying to make sure I'm not making up something, right? Just in terms of who are the best coaches. And maybe it's just because Steve Kerr is just steady Eddie and he's always been there and he's always been around. And it's been a little bit quieter before 2022 because of the Warriors' injuries. Another opportunity would have been that 2021 season when they lost in the play-in and Steph was doing his best to get it done. I don't think most people would say that the Warriors overachieved in that situation. You got Doc Rivers at 11. This is, again, from 2022. Ime Udoka at 10. Michael Malone at 9, again, from 2022. Taylor Jenkins at 8, right? Monty Williams at 7. Nick Nurse at 6, which is a little surprising to me. Tyronn Lue, that's another guy that everybody talks about being a brilliant coach. And another guy who, what did he do, Dibs? His guys were injured, and the team didn't miss a beat or overachieve. Steve Kerr, I guess the only situations he's had, because the Warriors have been so top-heavy, when his guys have been out, I mean, we're dealing with some dudes that aren't even in the league anymore, no disrespect. Mike Budenholzer being 4 is pretty surprising to me. Eric Spoelstra, 3. and I know it's going to happen now. I think Steve Kerr is going to be 1. Steve Kerr is at 1. They have Greg Popovich at 2, Steve Kerr at 1. So maybe I am making it up. Maybe I am, but it's always, maybe it's just understood, and it's always Tyronn Lue, Eric Spoelstra. Maybe people feel like they have to give them their flowers, and you got Popovich, who it's understood his greatness, and Steve Kerr has understood his greatness.
It's always difficult to judge, I think, in the NBA especially, because the really good teams, the teams that have a lot of talent, are going to win regardless of who their head coach is.
Right.
So when you take the really good coaches, and that's where I think Spoelstra deserves his flowers, because Miami, even this year, Miami came in, as an 8 seed, and
Right.
they didn't necessarily have the most talent in the Eastern Conference. You look at Boston with more talent. Philadelphia had more. I guess Brooklyn did until they gutted their roster and got rid of KD. But you look across the East, Milwaukee had more talent. And yet you get down to April, May, and June, and Coach Spo has his team ready, and he coaches them up to play winning basketball, and then they win games, and they win series, and then they end up being the team standing there at the end. And I do think Steve Kerr deserves credit for what he does, not only with the talent on that team, but with the personalities, particularly Draymond Green. And, coaching Draymond Green in and of itself is one of the more arduous things I think that anybody has to do in the association.
Yes, I would agree with that for sure. And, you get the cards that you're dealt and you handle it. And it's been well documented that Steve Kerr and Draymond Green, they're not always on the best of terms. They butt heads. And when you see stuff during the game and you think, okay, they'll figure it out in the locker room. They do, but it's real deal, right? I mean, handling Draymond is a real thing, right? He is a very unique player from how he plays on the court to his mentality on the court as well. So I think that those are the things that go into it. And really the question is a very long-winded way of saying if for some reason the Warriors, they don't offer Steve Kerr the extension, how many teams would be lined up to grab Steve Kerr? And based on everything we've broken down, it feels like a lot.
Mike Dunleavy Jr. on the extension coming up in just a moment. You're listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM in HD1, San Francisco. Always live on the free Odyssey app, Twitch and YouTube, powered by First NorCal Credit Union. It's Styles in for Willard and Dibbs here on 95.7 The Game. Mike Dunleavy Jr., new GM of the Golden State Warriors, weighed in on that very notion on the Dubs Talk podcast on NBC Sports Bay Area, and he's asked about the Monty Williams extension and Greg Popovich's big contract as it pertains to Steve Kerr signing on for more years.
Yeah, I mean, this is the landscape we're in. Players, coaches, everybody's taking advantage of the money that's out there, and I think it's great to see in the league as a whole. Like, it means the league's doing really well, and people are watching and enjoying the game. So I think all in all, it's great. And from a coaching standpoint, I'm sure the coaches are happy. From a player standpoint, I'm sure they're thrilled about the deal the guy in Boston just signed. So that's the way this league works. When teams and players do well, everybody benefits.
Mike Dunleavy running for office, politician, and I don't think what he said is inaccurate. It's in fact absolutely a fact, especially when it comes to the Golden State Warriors. So you've got 4 titles under Steve Kerr, and now he's entering the last year of his contract. Joe Lacob, the owner, one of the owners, the principal owner, just saw his president of basketball operations walk out the door, and for now, not take another job, but Bob Myers didn't retire. He just left the organization to pursue other things in his life. And so now you take the other pillar in that non-playing part of your organization, Steve Kerr. Does this motivate Joe Lacob to, by any means necessary, keep Steve Kerr?
I would say so. And I think that it's a lot less sticky than the Klay Thompson situation, because the relationship that Steve Kerr has with Steph, and how Steph is already signed on his contract. So to me, it's a no-brainer, because if I'm Joe Lacob, there is no thought process in my mind. I don't know about Steve Kerr coaching after Steph Curry, but there's no thought process in my mind that Steph Curry is going to play for another coach in a Warriors uniform. That's just not going to happen. So I'm much much more confident that a deal would get done with Steve Kerr than I am with Klay Thompson before the season.
And that's, I think, an interesting designation to make because Steve Kerr, they can sign him to however much they want to sign him to, and it doesn't affect the luxury tax one bit. That's just a cost, the cost of doing business essentially for the Golden State Warriors. Do you want Steve Kerr to continue coaching or not? Steve's son, Nick, just got the job down in Santa Cruz, so Nick Kerr will be the new head coach for the Santa Cruz Warriors, which is great news. And I wonder if those two things are related at all. In other words, we're going to do your son a solid. Not that Nick isn't qualified because he's worked in video rooms in San Antonio and here, and he's clearly on that track to be a coach, not a head coach yet, but a coach. Do you think that they did that, made that move as a way to show Steve, we want you to still be a part of the family?
Right. It definitely didn't hurt.
Your family is our family.
It definitely didn't hurt. And we see it in every sport. We see it across all sports. So really, when we talk about Team Nepo, right? And again,
nepotism, I like it. Nepoville, as you called it.
Nepoville. Take a trip to Nepoville. And I would say a lot of people think that one of the members of Nepoville, a person that lives there, you would say, would be Thanasis Antetokounmpo. Right, he's on the Bucks.
Giannis's brother,
who never really gets any time. He's a great bench guy. He's part of Bench Mob. Apparently, it was either Woj or Shams Charania said that there were other teams interested. Maybe that's true. I wouldn't know because I rarely see Thanasis play. But the Bucks signed him. They keep Giannis happy. That's just kind of part of the business. So this idea, and that's not to say that Thanasis isn't an NBA player. But two things can be true. Nick Kerr is a good, as far as they're concerned, he is qualified. But does it help who your father is? It doesn't hurt. Doesn't mean you're not qualified, but let's not pretend like it has nothing to do with the other. Thanasis Antetokounmpo is much better than majority, 99% of basketball players out there.
In the world?
In the world.
Okay.
What would you say, 90%?
I mean, I don't know. I just wonder where you're going with this because you look at Thanasis and he's been on the Bucks for essentially 4 years, and he's averaging 2.7 points a game. He's averaging 8 minutes a night. So you're telling me that if his name was Thanasis Jones, would he be in the association?
You know what's funny?
No, he wouldn't.
Well, what's funny you say that is when I do believe it was Woj. When he came out, Woj, and said there were other teams interested, Woj never does that. So even Woj knows that everybody thinks that Thanasis is just on the team because of Giannis. Woj came out and said there were actually other teams interested in Thanasis too because everybody knows that Thanasis is on the team because of his brother. We don't care. I mean, you can't pick what their family you're born to, but let's not act. We don't have to do this, Woj. We don't have to do this dance. It's okay.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're Woj, you're probably doing that dance to make sure that you get certain access in the future. So you're doing either the Bucks or the Antetokounmpo family a solid in, the Bucks, they secured him because, boy, many teams were hot on the trail of Thanasis, when in fact, if he was Thanasis Smith or Thanasis Jones, Thanasis Dibley,
right,
he's probably not in the association.
Happens all the time in baseball. Happens all the time.
Team Nepo.
Nepoville. I don't know if it was, technically, wasn't Mike Piazza Team Nepo?
Yes, because Tommy Lasorda was his godfather, essentially.
Sometimes Team Nepo doesn't mean you're not good. Team Nepo doesn't mean you won't be good. That one worked out.
He was in like the 61st round or something, way deep in the draft, and Tommy Lasorda had the Dodgers take Piazza as a solid to the family. We're going to do you a solid. And we've actually seen Team Nepoville, in broadcasting a ton. And it doesn't mean that the broadcasters who benefit from Nepoville are bad broadcasters. And a lot of times they're good broadcasters who get that little nudge based on the fact that, like Joe Buck, for example, his dad, Jack Buck, was a legend. And, Joe got a little head start because his dad was Jack Buck. And Joe Buck has gone on to be one of the greats of his era.
Well, exactly. And what they'll say is, whether it's sports or whatever it is, it's in their blood. Well, his daddy played, so it's in his blood, or whoever. But the bottom line is this: whether you're Team Nepo or not, eventually everybody's got a job to do. So it might help you get to the front of the line, but if you stink up the joint, you will get canned. It doesn't matter. So Team Nepo can only get you so far. At some point, you have to perform.